board today too. This is hosted by the Friends of Aiken County Historical Museum, whose president, Kathy, who's right over here, y'all already know her, along with several board members in the audience as well. A lot of people don't know that Aiken County Historical Museum is a public-private hybrid organization. So the county government maintains the building, they pay for my salary, so thank you. And then they keep up like the maintenance of the grounds and things like that for us. But anytime you see an exhibit, anytime you see a program, anytime you see an artifact restored and cared for, that is through funding from the Friends, which is why they host fundraisers like this with the Friends Lecture Series. We've also got some other great items or events coming up in the future, including can I say it? On October 1st? Okay. Friday, October 1st, we're going to have a low country bowl. So y'all better be here. So we're going to have some good pickings out on the lawn. So it'll be a fun time. If you've never been to a low country boil, they are certainly a community activity and very fun. So we're hoping to make supporting the museum fun, right? Yeah, that's right. Part of that is education. In education, I know how many of y'all in history class absolutely dreaded going to history class in high school? Okay, so too great. Sure. I remember going to high school and going to my history class, which, bless his heart, was taught by my coach. And it was a bunch of dates and it was a bunch of names. And so often you don't hear the humanity behind those names and those dates. And that's what's exciting. Bob back there, who's one of our volunteers, he was telling me about this book he's reading about Ulysses Grant about Turnell. And just how much you don't know, just because you know the man's name, you know his dates, doesn't mean you know him. And so that's part of the history of my talk as well, is yeah, I'm gonna throw some dates at you, I gotta do it, it's part of the drill. But I'm also gonna throw some stories at you and humanity at you. Humanity is a story of sadness, it is a story of triumph, it is a story of hope, it is a story of, defeat. So history's not always happy, but it's always fascinating. Because history is us. We will be history one day, and hopefully I will leave something for my niece and nephew to be proud of. Like go back and be like, yeah, Laura was crazy. Yeah, she was wild. Do you know what she did? So hopefully we can leave stories behind to interest the future generations. When they do a talk of county history 100 years from now, they can talk about how awesome we were. With that, do you want to start the screen share for our Zoomers out there? Hi, Zoomers! Let's give a little shout out to the webmates. All right. So, oops. Oh, I think that shared an image instead of the actual presentation. Can you try number 1? It's not letting me advance. No. Oh, look, always technical difficulties. Let's see what we got. Okay, let's stop share. Let's go screen share. That much more. Let's try. There we go. All right.
Wait, I have to go back to screen sharing.
How many of y'all got to walk in?
Oh, how do I get back to screen sharing?
Oh, this is it.
Oh,
yeah. What's on the laptop they're seeing too.
Okay.
But you can check in on the text on the chat box if you want to. Okay, so how many of y'all walked in the new exhibit over here before you came in? Awesome, great, thank you. Whoops. There.
If I check in on the chat box, it switches the screen.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry about that. If you saw the new exhibit, you basically know what we're going to go through. And that is the different eras of Aiken County history. And this is going to be a speed trip, so buckle up. There's a lot of history to cover, and I am just your overview. The other 4 speakers coming after me are going to be more detailed, more depth, get into different stories. But my job is to give you an overall comprehension of everything that's happened in Aiken County. And believe it or not, it's more than just 150 years. We've been a county officially for that long. But of course, we've had inhabitants and stories that predate that for thousands of years. So we're going to go into American Indian, colonial era, antebellum, Civil War, Reconstruction, Victorian, the World Wars, and there's Howard Page. Okay. Are y'all ready for the time travel? All right, good deal. So, the American Indians. Now, of course, we know that American Indians have been around here for a lot longer than the 1670s, but unfortunately, they have no written record. We do have archaeological digs that have shown us some of the inhabitants of this area, especially down in Hammond's Ferry. There was an archaeological dig done there before they built Hammond's Ferry, and there was a very large development down there on the river, which makes sense. The river is a source of water, a source of food, and a source of transportation. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about us, and particularly why we developed here, is something called the geographic or geological fall line. How many have ever heard of the fall line? Oh, dang, y'all are good. Okay, I can't surprise you. That's normally a surprise one. But the fall line, of course, is a geological barrier or drop-off zone where everything south of us in the fall line is sandy. Everything above the fall line is red clay. I know I've got it all in my house. I don't know about y'all. It gets everywhere. And rockiness. And that's because some theories exist that below the fault line was an ancient oceanic border. And that's how we end up with sharks in Hitchcock Wood. I don't know if y'all know that, but a few years ago they found the fossil remains of a shark over in Hitchcock. So we used to be swimming with the sharks. We can do a shark week right here. I'm telling y'all, it's gold. We'll make a ton of money off it. But so because of this fall line, the rapids of the Savannah River start about where we are, which means that everything above the rapids you can't travel with boats. So we became an inland port, a natural inland port for transportation up and down the Savannah River to the international ports of Charleston and Savannah. Now, Dr. Henry Woodward was one of the first agents of the Lords Proprietors. I love saying that, that we were once ruled by the Lords Proprietors. Sounds fancy. They were men who were given the Carolinas as a gift by King Charles II, and they sent over an agent named Dr. Henry Woodward. And he was the first person that we know of who came into contact with the Native Americans in our area. And the first tribe he met were the Westos. Now, the Westos were kind of interesting. They were a bit combative, a bit of a terror for the other American Indian tribes around here, and they were not well liked by many others, but they controlled the fall line area. So Dr. Henry Woodward came up on the advice of on the orders of the Lords Proprietors and made a treaty agreement with the Westos, and he describes their village as palisaded with hundreds of warriors. So it was a very well manned palisade that was here. Now, like I said, the Westos were not too much fun. They weren't really good to trade with. They were warlike. So eventually, I left off the date. Anyways, the Westo War occurred when the British government asked the Savannah, who lived a little bit below Silver Bluff, to basically make war on the Westos and keep them out, because the Savannah were easier to work with as far as trading goes than the Westos were. So the Savannah were brought in, they kicked out Westo, bye-bye Westo, and that is why it is the Savannah River and not the Westo River. Next up with Appalachians, although they were more close to Augusta, but they were trading partners with our area. And of course, to facilitate trade, the British government created Fort Moore, which was construction ended on that in 1716. So some of the artifacts in our new exhibit come from Fort Moore. And it was a garrison area, so it was military protection for the colonials in the area. It was also a meeting place, a safe place where both Native Americans and the colonials could gather and trade. Now, the last tribe that was in our area were the Chickasaw. And that is because the Chickasaws sided with the British government during the American Revolution. So, after the American Revolution was over, of course, the Patriots said, you didn't side with us, so you're getting kicked out. And they were moved west. And that was the end of American Indian tribes, really, in large numbers in our area. And I love this map. It is Township of New Windsor. We've got Fort Moore, you've got the Bluffs, you've got Gallatin, you've got Augusta over here. So all kinds of great things in that map. Now there's your Dr. Henry Woodward. The first tribe we ever met were the Edisto, of course, near Edisto Island today. And they played a game that he documented called Chunky. Now, Chunky used this stone disc, and it was two American Indian men who would play this, and they would chunk the stone out into a large field, and then they would take 6-foot-long spears, and they would hurl them through the air and try and land as close to the stone as possible. Which sounds like to me a very dangerous bocce, right? Very dangerous bocce. And then, of course, we met the Westo and the New Windsor Township. Now, the Lord's proprietors were eventually removed, both because locals petitioned it and because the British government decided that the Lord's proprietors were not holding up their end of the bargain. They were not really populating these lands in the Carolinas like they were supposed to. So the British government comes in the late 1720s, kicks the Lord proprietors out, buys all their shares up, and then starts sending out advertisements and saying, hey y'all, Carolina's pretty cool. Come on over. We'll give you lots of land. It's free. Don't worry about it. Come on over. And that's what they did. In fact, through these advertisements, an entire town of people in Switzerland picked up their families, picked up their lives, and moved to this area and settled close to where Beach Island is today. And that was the town of Appenzell. Like I said, they were Swiss, and one of the main founders of the group that came over here, supporters, was a guy named Tobler. And I would like to know if he's related to the Toblerone, because I want that chocolate factory here. And we can say we have the heritage for it. So, although my waistline was not like that. But, so they came here, and John Tobler, oh, here it is, all blown up. I love it. It's a great map. And I love that the Stockahatchee used to be called salt catchers. I wonder why. I don't know. It's kind of a cool thing. Oh, I love this. So John Tobler, of course, he's lived here for about 20 years at this point, and he sends out his own brochure advertising our wonderful area. And you can come join us. And he says, the climate of the province is neither too warm nor too cold, therefore quite benevolent and agreeable. I wonder how many summers he was ignoring that. I myself have enjoyed our summers very much here, but I could not do it without air conditioning. So I think there's a little bit of false advertising on his part. This was interesting too. He stated about trade, and he said every year, once a year, sometimes twice, the men would load up 2,000 horses with goods, or load up 2,000 horses in wagons. You go 1,000 miles into the Western Territory, so we're talking more of the Cherokee area, and they would load up the deer skins and come back, and they would bring up to about 2,000 pounds worth of deer skins back from this annual trip, and they would load them up on boats going down the Savannah River, which would end up in Charleston or Charlestown or Savannah. So we were again that hub for trading. I love this because I think right here he's talking about a gentleman I'm going to get to in just a minute. But this was a wildland. We were the back country of the Carolinas. There wasn't much rules going on here. You kind of do what you wanted. As evidence of that, John Tobler writes about an Irish gentleman who bought 125,000 acres and then decided to declare himself a lord and have all people settle on this land and pay him a tithe. Which I'm like, dude, no, you left England for this purpose. And then I love it because John writes, but I do not believe it, for only foolish people will give a tithe and they can have good land for the king tax-free. So again, free land, there's no reason to do that. Right here in Tobler's, he wrote up an experience where the Native Americans came down, met with the governor of Charlestown at the time, that was the capital of South Carolina, and they met with a big conference where they exchanged deer skins with gifts of muskets, powder, shot, and other things. And so this was an annual kind of, not annual, but a gathering point for multiple tribes and merchants in this area. Now that Irish gentleman, I think Tobler was talking about George Galpin. How many of y'all have heard of George Galpin? Yeah, he's a bit of a controversial dude. He's very interesting. He came from Ireland, so he abandoned one family in Ireland with a wife and kids, came here, married another woman, then had 2 Native American wives, then had liaisons with one of his enslaved African laborers, and then I think later on took another wife. So we're racking up about 6 or 7 liaisons. Maybe must not have existed back then, but He did those relationships with the Native Americans to secure his trade relationships. But interesting character. You should read his will. It's very complicated. But his house later became Fort Galpin during the American Revolution. And when the British captured it, they called it Fort Dreadnought. I love that. A straight spear into your heart, doesn't it, more than Fort Galpin? But of course, Fort Dreadnought was recaptured by none other than Light Horse Harry Lee. It was Robert E. Lee's daddy. So, neat history coming here to Aiken County. Another interesting figure of Beach Island in the early years was George Lyle. He actually was an emancipated African preacher who was traveling throughout the Southeast, and he started the very early beginnings of the Silver Bluff Baptist Church in 1773. And this church still exists today. You can still go out there and attend services. And it was the first first Black Baptist church in all of South Carolina. And it had many offspring from its own church, which is just amazing to have that history here. Now, one of my favorites is the Martin family. Just because I'm a lady, and so often ladies, right, we're left out of history. Yes, exactly. So often we are forgotten about. The Martin family lived on Martintown Road in North Augusta. They came here in the 1760s from Virginia. Martin, the head Martin by then passed away, but he had 8 sons and 1 daughter. So poor Miss Martin. But the sons all went off to fight in the American Revolution, with one of them passing away in Augusta during the siege of Augusta. But what was interesting is, so you have Augusta, it's been captured by the British, but upstate in the 96th district, you have Colonel Greene fighting against the British. And these wives, 3 of them, of the Martin sons, dressed up in their husband's clothing with their husband's muskets. In the dead of night, they knew the British were running dispatches up Martintown Road to the 96th district to their British general. They intercepted the British dispatches, stole them, and then one of the daughters or wives ran them all night long up to Colonel Greene and handed them over to him. So here we have 3 cool ladies cross-dressing like their husbands, beating up some British dudes, and then saving the day by sending the dispatches up to Colonel Greene. So hoorah, ladies, right? You don't often get mentioned, so I had to get that shout out. Trade and agriculture, like I said before, we had deer skins, powder, munitions. Early crops were cotton and timber. Cotton wasn't until much later after the invention of the cotton gin. And of course, we had enslaved laborers who worked the agricultural areas here. We also had steamboats on the Savannah, which leads me to Henry Schultz. How many of y'all have heard dear old Henry? Yeah. He's another interesting gentleman. He was an immigrant from Germany, came here after fighting the Napoleonic Wars. He started a bridge bank in Augusta, and he made a lot of money on it. Very much became a wealthy gentleman with his partner, John McKinney. But some things happened, I won't get into it because this is just an overview, so you'll have to read about it some other time. But Henry Schultz loses the bridge to Augusta, to Georgia, the state of Georgia, and becomes so embittered that they have taken his toll bridge, which made him a lot of money, that he swore vengeance against the city of Augusta. What do you do to hurt Augusta? You take its trade, get them in the pocket where it hurts. So Henry Schultz builds a major town to rival Augusta. And of course, he's going to call it Hamburg, where he was from, or Hamburg. So at one point, we were Hamburgers. So hamburgers. And so he starts this town called Hamburg right across from Augusta. You see, here's his former bridge that was taken from him. Here's Augusta, and here's his new city. And for a while, you know, he was very successful because he brought the Charleston to Hamburg Railroad up here. From 1830 to 1833, they constructed the railroad, which is a major infrastructure, a major deal for this area. It was 136 miles long, the longest in the U.S. at that time. It was the first to be powered entirely by steam, the first to carry mail under contract, the first with regular passenger service, and the first steamer that was created by them was called the Best Friend. Now, people often think the Best Friend came here, actually never made it here to Aiken. What they would do is each time a part of the line was completed, they would run out the Best Friend to the new depot for the day, have a big hurrah of it, Everybody would buy tickets and enjoy it. And then they would turn around from the depot and go back to Charleston. Well, they would trot it out all these times, bring it back, trot it out, bring it back. Eventually, the best friend was like, and it would malfunction with one of the engineers and it exploded. So what they did, of course, is recycle back then. So they were eco-friendly even back then. They recycled it and renamed it the Phoenix because the Phoenix rose from the ashes of the best friend. Now, we're not sure if it's the Phoenix that made it here eventually, but something like that would have made it up to this area. As a result of the Charleston-Hamburg Railroad, we got Aiken. We did not exist before the railroad. We are a railroad town. And what they did is the South Carolina Canal Railroad Company contracted with a surveyor locally named Thomas Anderson. He laid out the city of Aiken, and then Cyril Pascalis and Alfred Dexter, who were employees of the railroad, they came in and divvied up all the lots that Anderson had drawn out and created the lots to sale by the railroad company. So we often hear Pascalis and Dexter, we often forget poor Anderson. So we need to remember Anderson was one of the early developers of Aiken as well. Now, we're skipping ahead in the timeline a little, so forgive me for this, but I thought it was important to mention it. Later on, the railroads would expand, new branches occurred, including one running through Sally and Wagner, which fortuitously created those cities as well. And what I love about it is that their railroad was called the Swamp Rabbit. I'm like, Swamp Rabbit? Okay, I guess maybe rabbit for fast and swamp movement for all the swamp. I'm not quite sure. You'll have to ask Cynthia Vardy up at the Wagner Museum about that. But I just love this called the Swamp Rabbit. And it moved a lot of kaolin, turpentine was a big thing up there, watermelons, and penders. Okay, who can tell me what penders are?
Peanuts.
Peanuts, that's right. If you wanted to cook peanuts or boil peanuts, you would have to go to Wagner, and it was called Pendertown because they had the best peanuts around. So I love that. And good on you for knowing that. Now, the other thing besides the railroad were the mills. Oh my gosh, y'all. We have such a water source here with all these tributaries feeding down into the Savannah River. We have tons of mills. Meals? Did you hear my southern coming out there? Every now and then, if I say pie, it comes on out. But the mills here were a great part of our infrastructure. So it started off with grist mills, of course, to mill flour and food and grain for different residents in the area. Then we moved on to the fact that we discovered we had kaolin. And as a kid, I didn't know what kaolin was. I knew the streets around here were dusted white, and I didn't understand why. But kaolin is a major manufacturing around here. You dig deep enough, we found this white powdery clay. It's fantastic. It's in everything from our makeup to our rubber tires on our cars to, of course, pottery. And that was a big component. In fact, our kaolin made it all the way over to Josiah Wedgwood. So we were used in British Wedgwood, so we are fancy, y'all. So that's really kind of cool to know that our product here was so well respected and well appreciated in the community that they were shipped over to England to produce Wedgwood. But of course, we're really known for our fabric mills. The city of Graniteville was created by William Gregg in 1845, and the Graniteville mill system was a very huge component to our economic development for 130 years in this area. So y'all can always drive by Vaucluse, Warrenville, the Langley Valley, Clearwater area. We have a lot of manufacturing going on. One of the things I did want to point out is there's this beautiful drawing of the Graniteville mill system from the 1840s. And then over here, we've got a piece of pottery made by David Drake, who was an enslaved potter. And it's one of the pieces in our collection. You can see it today. You can go back in our communities area, and you can see the signature LM right there. And that was because the last person who owned David Drake was a man named Lewis Miles. So he inscribed his owner's initials, LM, on the side of pottery. Now, we don't have any of his poetry pieces. That's what he's most well known for. But if any of y'all have a $250,000 to spare, I will go out and I will buy one. And we will have it here on display, and I'll put your name on it. I swear to goodness gracious. I'll call it the Chris Jacoback David Drake Pottery piece. So, Chris. No? Okay. But,
Lottery.
okay. So David Drake is a well-known, well-respected potter, especially for his poetry, because he was a literate man in a time it was dangerous to be literate. And his pieces are at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There are private collections. I think even Oprah has a piece, which maybe she'll donate it to us, right? I can always call Oprah up. But something else fascinating to know about our cultural history. Now, moving us on to the Civil War, and I hope I get this right because Pete's kind of the expert. He wrote our Civil War panel over there. So if I mess up, don't call me out. Okay. Just take me aside later. Okay. Now, Civil War did come to our area, and it came in the battle between the Confederate Major General Joseph Wheeler and the Union Major General Judson Kilpatrick. Now, Kilpatrick was also nicknamed Kill Cavalry because he was famous for taking out cavalry units wholesale, and that's what happened here with the cavalry battle. Now, it happened on February 11th to February 12th, which were a Saturday and a Sunday. So weekend entertainment, y'all, going on downtown. And that's the thing that gets me, is that often we think of Civil War battles occurring in big fields or open lands. We don't think of them happening in downtown where shells are whizzing past buildings and family homes and things like that. But that's what occurred. The battles were fought around what they called Railroad Avenue at the time, which is Park Avenue, around Lawrence Street, and around Richland Avenue. In fact, we have, I have to tell you what I said. So before Judson got here, Kilpatrick got here, he came up through Barnwell. He was an offshoot of Sherman. Sherman was heading for Columbia, although we didn't know that at the time. We had theories about it, but we didn't know it. And then Kilpatrick came off here with any sort of a distraction or possibly to go to the mills, because the mills were producing the Confederate cloth for, was it uniforms or bedding?
Maybe both, but you.
Maybe both. Okay. So we think that was his goal, possibly also an end goal of Augusta, because we had the gunpowder there with the Confederate powder works, and we had the Augusta Arsenal there as well. But so there's no real certainty as to what he was exactly going for. But he comes into town from Barnwell, and in a letter to Sherman, he said, "Dear sir, I have changed the name of Barnwell to Burnwell." Like, dude, did you have to rub it in? It's kind of brutal. But he burned the entire city of Barnwell before he got here. The fact that Joseph Wheeler was able to repel Judson Kilpatrick is what saved Aiken. And that's why we look as beautiful as we do downtown when we're burning ground like Barnwell or Columbia or Atlanta. Now, what's interesting is Reverend Cornish was the pastor here at St. Thaddeus Church, up just on the road on Pendleton and what used to be Curve Street at the time. And he witnessed the whole thing. He kept a daily diary. So we have his diary from February 11th to February 12th when he recorded. And what's interesting is he talks about the fact that after the first day of battle, 2 or 5 of the injured men were brought into his rectory, his home. And they treated them as best they could, but 2 of them passed away in his rectory. So they walked them out to the St. Thaddeus Church and buried them. So there are 2 Confederate soldiers who were buried by Reverend Cornish in the St. Thaddeus Cemetery. And he writes about giving them last rites and sent the burial service over them. Lewis Dedman, age 21, Jesse Morris, age 24. On a little bit of a humorous note, there can be said in such a thing, is that he also noted in his diary that none of the children showed any appearance of fright during the shelling and the charge. It was difficult to keep them out of the street during the fighting. And I'm like, okay, I think wrangling my nephew and niece are bad. I can imagine wrangling them in the middle of the battle going on just outside of our door. So, and he's right, shells were whizzing past and hitting different buildings. So you can just imagine the children were like, hey, yeah, there's something going on. And you're like, no, there's not. Get back in the house. So very tenuous situation happening here in downtown Aiken. We're lucky enough to have a primary source reporting of what happened. Now you may ask yourself what happened to the Union soldiers who died during the Battle of Aiken. They were buried at the First Baptist Church of Aiken. So if you go there today, you can still see the gravestones of the Union soldiers, a handful or so that are unknown. So they never knew the names. And it just says U.S. soldier on their grave. Now, that brings us into Reconstruction. So, Aiken County is only one of 2 counties that was founded during Reconstruction in the state of South Carolina. The other was Oconee. So we do have a uniqueness in that we were founded during Reconstruction, this kind of tenuous, politically, eruptive period of time. And it's fascinating to me to know that we were created during such a radical time in our history. And we were cut from 4 different districts. We were cut from Barnwell, Edgefield, Lexington, and Orangeburg. And we were named, of course, after William Aiken, which the city of Aiken was named after, who was the president of the South Carolina Canal Railroad Company when the rail line was being built up here. Now, Mr. Aiken never lived to see the railroad completed, and he never came here that we know of, but the city was named in his honor after he died tragically in an accident. We do know that Aiken County is not a new thing. As early as possibly the late 1820s, different citizens of our area were petitioning for a new county. So it didn't magically just happen during Reconstruction. This was a 4+ decade long effort to develop Aiken County. But the man who finally got it approved and got it through the legislation was Charles D. Hayne. And he was born a free man of color in Charleston, South Carolina. And at the time, he was a representative of Barnwell District. And that's him right there. And what we were cut from, again, you can see right here, is a piece of Edgefield, a piece of Lexington that follows the North Edisto, and then all the way down through Barnwell and Orangeburg. So that's kind of generally how we were divvied up. This was done by me, so take it with a huge grain of salt. I don't know, this is going to walk out and measure the borders, but that's about it. So, now this is a map. I know it's hard to see, sorry y'all. I was hoping to get a better copy. But this is the townships map, which I never really understood townships because today we have districts. But these were the original townships of Aiken County. So you have Schultz Township, named after Henry Schultz. You don't know that. And one little fascinating story I'm going to say real quick is that Henry Schultz was so embittered again by his defeat by Augusta that his last request was that he was to be buried standing straight up with his back towards Augusta. We don't know if he was actually buried that way because his house right now is under concrete. So there is no way to find his grave. But if he is, that's pretty daggone cool. That's a kind of like a last little, to the city of Augusta. We have Langley. We have Bragg, named after William Bragg, so that's the Granville area. We have Shaw's, which is Shaw's Creek. We have Ward, we have Chinkapin, which I did not know is a form of chestnut. So it's a chestnut tree. Maybe it grows along the Chinkapin River up there. We have McTier, we have Aiken, of course. We have Hammond, which the Hammond family was some early settlers here in the area. We have, get Mark to read. Gidding Swamp. I just love that name, Gidding Swamp. I have no idea what they call it, Gidding, but we'll go with it. Rocky Springs, Windsor, of course, Millbrook, Sleepy Hollow, which is kind of cool. We have our own Sleepy Hollow. Then we have, I think that's Silverton. I think it's Silverton. Yeah, Silverton. And then we have Tabernacle, and then we have Rocky Swamp. Yeah, so we have 17 in all. I think there's Rocky Grove in there too. Rocky Spring and Rocky Grove in there. Now, it was not all happiness when Aiken County was founded. Not everybody was on board. Edgefield was mad because they lost the mills of Graniteville. They lost Hamburg, their inland port, and they lost a huge chunk of the railroad, which brought them a lot of transportation. Barnwell lost us, Aiken. In fact, the land we're sitting on right now is in the Barnwell district. They lost their agricultural lands along portions of the Edisto River. But by far, Edgefield was hurt the most by us being created. But I love this. This was in the Edgefield Advertiser, and it was put in there by a gentleman from Graniteville, and he wrote, "The people of Graniteville and other portions of the county embraced in the proposed new county were not consulted in regard to the measure, and the act was passed without their consent, if not contrary to their wishes." Dang, he's really throwing down the gauntlet. And almost without their knowledge that such an act was at that time contemplated. But notwithstanding this, the people of Graniteville are disposed to acquiesce and will not impose any reasonable expenditures of public money necessary for the consummation of the act. So that's a really fancy way of saying, you guys didn't talk to us, We didn't know about this county being founded, and we don't like it. And so it's fascinating to know that this was not something that was unanimous. It wasn't something that everybody wanted. Aiken County was still very much a controversial creation in 1871. Like I said, this was a decade-long process. Myself and a volunteer went on a trip to the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, and we found this original document that was mentioned in Isabel Vanderbilt's book on Aiken County. And it is, we think about 1827 to 1830, and it's a petition to the South Carolina legislature by residents of Edgefield District, Orangeburg District, and the Barnwell District, asking for their own county, because if you lived in Beach Island and you wanted to go to the courthouse to conduct any legal business, you had to go all the way to Barnwell, which could sometimes take you a whole day, if not 2 days, if the roads were impassable. So it was very difficult to get your work done, so to speak. And so all of these residents signed this petition saying, please give us our own county because we need a courthouse around here. So that was their first reasoning, was a courthouse. Later on, it became a tourism push. After the Civil War, we became this winter colony. All these people were coming down here. And we had a different economic system than Edgefield or Barnwell did, which was more agricultural. So then you have these economic systems fighting each other and have different needs. And so that was another push. But also to shift power away from Barnwell and Edgefield, which had been so politically powerful. And here they wanted to kind of divvy up some of that power. But what's fascinating is that our county was founded by a diverse group of men, both economically, racially, and nationality, because 2 of the men were immigrants. They were not born in the United States. We have them listed here. So most people are familiar with the Founders Monument at Aiken County Courthouse, but there were actually a group of men who preceded them. When the act was signed on March 10th of 1871 to start Aiken County, in that act was listed 2 committees. One committee to do the geographic borders, so to determine what was going to make up Aiken County. Another group to determine our buildings. First off, we needed a courthouse, which everybody had been arguing from for 40 years. So these men took charge for the first year and a half and operated Aiken County. And they are Frank Arnhem, who is a German immigrant, was not born here. They often called him the Count. And then you have Samuel Lee, who's from the Abbeville district. And he was a biracial man who was born in Freedom. So you have this mixture of people coming together just 6 short years after the Civil War ended. And here they are working together for the common cause of creating us, which I think is a wonderful point of history to bring out in this time. Then you see the first elected officials. So these guys show up more around October, November of 1872. So about a year and a half into our founding. And these are the gentlemen that are on the Founders Monument out there. And they did a huge chunk of the work, of course. But I think it's important to recognize the first guys who really put in those first efforts to create us. Now, all that came to a head with the election of 1876, because now you have a state legislature that is majority Black representatives, which at the time, in the racial demographics of South Carolina population, Black citizens did have a majority over white citizens in South Carolina. So you have, therefore, Black representation as the majority in the state legislature. Well, that didn't sit well with a lot of folks, and particularly didn't sit well with the Democrats, because at the time the Democrats were mainly made up of white citizens, and the Republicans were mainly Black citizens. And so you have this almost kind of media blitz going on to say, get rid of the radical Republicans and their majority in the state legislature. And especially in 1876, it all comes to a head because a gentleman running for the governorship is Governor Wade Hampton. He's a Confederate hero. He's well known throughout the state as being a person who is in favor of Black suffrage, but also wants to see Democrats coming into power again. So he seems sort of a compromise candidate, but there is so much voter fraud. There is so much voter intimidation going on that at the end of the election, no one's really sure who's won. And for a period of months, we actually have 2 governors in South Carolina because the Democratic candidate would not give, or the Republican candidate would not give up his seat to Governor Hampton, who is the Democratic Also in this time period, we have a lot of, like I said, voter intimidation. We have the Hamburg massacre occurring in Henry Schultz's town, which is the, well, you have to read about it because I can't go into it because I only have a few more minutes left. But the Hamburg massacre and the Ellington riot are two sort of racially motivated events where Black men are intimidated by the white gun clubs, and they are sort of intimidated into not voting. And what ends up happening during our two governorships is that there's also a very controversial presidential election going on at the same time. You have Rutherford B. Hayes, who's a Republican, versus Samuel Tilden, who's a Democrat. And there's sort of a backroom deal. And what ends up happening is Rutherford B. Hayes comes to South Carolina or talks to South Carolina politicians, because we were one of the states that the votes hinged on, and says, if Governor Hampton is made governor, if I'm made Governor Hampton governor, will y'all make me president? And so a deal was struck. And Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president of the United States, and Governor Hampton becomes governor of South Carolina. Now, for a while, Governor Hampton did try to bring in a lot of Black politicians. He appointed a lot of Black men to political positions, but eventually that all deteriorated within the years to come, and then we get the Jim Crow South. Again, this is all very complicated subject matters in little tiny minutes of explanation. So please delve into these subjects further because there's a lot of controversy surrounding the election of 1876. Now, I've only got 13 minutes left, so I'm going to spur through this area. The Victorian and Edwardian eras. What's important about that is technological developments. We have electricity for the first time coming to downtown Aiken. We have telephones happening for the first time, which is amazing technology. And then, of course, we have the trolley. And the trolley is so cool because it's an initiative of James U. Jackson, founder of North Augusta, to bring a trolley from Augusta all the way here to Aiken. And it operates from 1902 to 1929. And we have a trolley ticket from the last day that the trolley operated, which is closer to our gift shop in that exhibit area. So shout out to the gift shop. Y'all go check out the trolley ticket and shop a little in our gift shop. I'm not biased. I'm not trying to lead you that direction. But so we do have one of the last trolley tickets on the last day that the trolley operated, which would be so cool. And I interviewed a woman who lived in Belvedere a couple years ago. She was 95 at the time, and she remembered riding the trolley. And she said as a little girl, her mother would give her a dime, which would get her from Clearwater, Belvedere area up to Aiken. And then when they got here, there was no turnaround for the trolley. Instead, what you did is you stood up and you flipped your seat, and then you came back the other direction. So that was kind of cool to hear that story. So I'm wondering, we never had a turnabout here for the trolley system, so how did they do that? Did they just ride backwards? But no, they flipped their seats. So that was kind of cool to hear her tell me that story. We also get the birth of new cities. We get Langley, we get Minetta, we get North Augusta, Sally, Wagner, Warrenville. So all these towns are coming into incorporation around us. And of course, we get Aiken as a health resort. Now, number one, we get the health resort people because we're on the railroad, and that makes for easy transportation. But number two, they often brag about our sandy soils, our lack of yellow fever, all that kind of fun stuff. And of course, they only stayed here until about May, and then they got out of town, like wise people would, and they went back up north. But what was interesting is, in all the brochures, they keep writing about our piney air. I'm like, what's so important about the fact that we had pine trees around here? Pine trees are everywhere. Well, it turns out that pine trees have a chemical they give off called pinene. And pinene is actually still in bronchodilators today. It helps open up your lungs and helps you breathe better. So that's why we became a hub for tuberculosis treatment here. Because people felt better when they came down here and breathed in our piney air, which would dilate your lungs. Of course, it didn't cure them of tuberculosis, unfortunately, but it did make them feel a lot better. Now, Celestine Eustace brought her sickly niece here, and her sickly niece was, behind me, Louise Eustace Hitchcock. And Miss Hitchcock loved this area so much, she fell in love with it, that she started telling all of her friends about it. And she and Miss Celestine, her aunt, started buying land around here and selling it to their friends. And that built us into the winter colony and that kind of new economic development for our area. But I loved it. And one of the write-ups in newspapers said, Aiken is a wonderful place to visit, a great health resort, in spite of the fact that it has, the town is called Aiken, like, oh, my Aiken back. And the doctor here is called Dr. Coffin. So we did have a pretty good PR move to get away with Aiken and Dr. Coffin. And of course, all this would build into our grand hotels. Oh, this is such a cool image, y'all. This is the trolley right here, next to a horse and buggy, and it's going across the 13th Street Bridge, which was also built during the Victorian times. So kind of cool to see that. Here's a picture of downtown Aiken during the 1870s, 1880s, and look at these wide thoroughfares. I mean, it's just amazing to think that we have such grand boulevards down here. Kind of cool. That's Park Avenue, and you can see it being planted with trees. And I think somebody told me that's a Presbyterian church back there. So yeah, it's kind of cool to see that. This was the Highland Park Hotel. Absolutely gorgeous. Sat right on the hill over there. But of course we know all good things come to an end, and it burned to the ground in 1898. And here you can see the hotel on flames and everybody trying to save as much furniture as they could by running it out the building. Thankfully, no one was hurt except, if y'all read David Tavernier's book, then you read the incident of how the night watchman who was supposed to keep an eye on the building allowed for the fire to start. And so when his boss came there, like 2 a.m. in the morning, and said, "What the heck happened?" The night watchman was already pretty much in the drink at that point. He was having a hard night, so he hit up the bar for a little bit. And as a result, I think a skirmish occurred between the two men. A shot was fired, and the night watchman ended up with a glancing blow off his chest. So he survived it, but he nearly became the only victim of the Highland Park Hotel. And then you have the North Augusta Hampton Terrace Hotel, named after Roy Hampton. In fact, that portrait was in the entranceway of that hotel. And when the hotel caught fire on New Year's Eve, 1916, and what a party to burn the house down, literally. But of course, no one was in the building, except for the 100 chambermaids. They were upstairs. So you can see how the flames lit up that painting, and that's the damage from the fire that occurred that night. So it's so cool to have that painting from that building. But it was just stunning. I mean, a massive, massive building in North Augusta. And for those of y'all who know, this is Lookaway Hall in downtown, and this was the first schoolhouse where now Grace Methodist Church is on Georgia Avenue. Moving into the modern era, I thought I'd throw this in there just because I think it's so fascinating. There was actually a POW camp in Aiken County, and it's right up the road near modern day Aiken High School. And it existed there for about the time period of 3 years, and it did house German POWs, and up to about 620 of them. And what's fascinating to me is to think that there was, of course, a shortage of manpower during World War II with a lot of our men off to serve. And so these prisoners were put to work. They were hired out to the peach farmers and to the peanut farmers and to anybody in the Edgefield, Johnston, Aiken area who needed help harvesting their land. And so we actually have a story in a local book about a young boy during World War II, remember riding into the fields of his father's farm out in Edgefield with a bunch of German soldiers sitting around him in the truck with him in Germany. So very trippy kind of thing. And of course, there was a POW camp also in Augusta at the same time. Now, we don't have any pictures of the POW camp here that I found, but this one is as close as I can get, and this one was in Williamston, North Carolina around the same time. And what we know is that ours had these kind of above grade tents that were in our area. So this is probably visually as close as I can get y'all to what our camp would look like. Now, the latest and greatest development of Aiken County, of course, has been the Savannah River site. And the Savannah River site was announced on November 28th, 1950. And the sad point, or the sad story behind the Savannah River site, I mean, the Savannah River site has been wonderful. It's employed members of my family, it's brought my family members down from the north to work down here. But it did displace 6,000 people from their homes and their lands and their cemeteries. And so towns like Ellington, Dunbarton, Myers Mill, Hawthorne, Silverton all vanished in a time period of about 1 year here in our area. So while the balance is been positive for the most part, because this was built to protect our country, and it gave jobs to a multitude of people in our area, and brought really an incredible amount of scholars, researchers, scientists into our area, a lot of economic diversity as well. It is sad that those 6,000 people did lose their homes and their lands. But it was built between 1951 and 1956 by 38,500 workers, which included 2 of the men who starred in The Wizard of Oz as munchkins. They were small enough or short enough to go into the barrels to weld from the inside. So 2 of the stars, they were brothers, actually worked at some universe like welding our pipes, and they worked on The Wizard of Oz, which is so cool. It took about 1.1 billion to construct, and today plutonium that was processed there has been used by NASA to power many satellites and voyagers into space. So it really goes beyond just the bomb plant and into a whole new world of things that it's brought to our culture and to our area. And with that, 3:56, Linda, 3:56, wrapping up right on time. And so I will say, now our museum doesn't have a website just now, but the Friends do, ACHMFriends.org. And we have created a temporary website called Aiken County, or Aiken County 150, AikenCounty150.org. If you go on there, we've got our videos, and myself and my coworker Leah have gone around the county and interviewed different museums, different historic sites. So if you go on our YouTube channel, Aiken County 150, you can see Fort Galvin and the archaeological dig. You can see the Wagner Museum and learn about the swamp rabbit and all the things out there. So we really try to travel throughout Aiken County and show you different stories, which we will be adding to all your homes. Now, with that, I see a panic look on Linda's face. Do you need me to help you with that?
I don't know how to end it.
Got it?
How to end the screen share.
Sure.
Currently just doing
Yeah, we just go down to screen share.
that.
Oh, sorry. Actually, go up here. It's not screen share. Here. Oh, you're not screen sharing. That's fine. You're good. You're back to normal. That's why you can see them all. Yeah. With that, I will take any questions that y'all might have. Do you want to throw me a curveball? You don't? All right. Well, thank you to our seniors, and thank you to y'all.
Good. So excited that you're here today because it means the museum is open to events. Just applaud yourself. It's just a joy to us that over the past year when we've been planning things and not been able to hold a single one of them, that we are doing it now. If you were here the other night for the grand opening of the county history exhibit, a lot of people were excited to be here. And we're taking that as a compliment to us, not just the fact that they didn't have to wear a mask that day. One of our newest programs is called Recollections Oral History Program. And that we have been planning this for months now, and we are kicking it off. So if you go into the county history room, I'm going to be passing out these cute little cards about recollections. The whole idea of the program is that we are going to ask for nominations, and they can be self-nominations, for people to be interviewed in a recording studio that we will be setting up here at the museum to interview people about a million different subjects that we need to know about to augment the displays and the exhibits here in the museum, so that each exhibit will have a personal touch to it. As Lauren said in the beginning of the program, names and dates don't mean a lot until you know about the person. And that's what we're going to do. We will have someone that you know, maybe yourself, on record, audio and visual, and we will take snippets of these and put them within into an exhibit where you can push a button and hear somebody talk about what you're seeing. And maybe some of the pictures that you see will be brought by those people. We will scan them, we will have them in our system. We are really happy to be collecting all of this. So when somebody says, what do you know about this program at the museum called Recollections? That's what it is. It is a county-wide oral history program. I'm really happy to tell you too, that 2 people who found out about it were so excited that before we ever breathed a word of this, they gave us $25,500 to this program. I mean, this is not just 50 cents here or there, So now that isn't enough. We need a lot more money, but it did give us the courage and conviction that this is exciting. And so we want you to be excited too. We want you to nominate people to be interviewed. We want you to give us money too. But that's not all. The Low Country Oil, we're going to have a history hop here on October 23rd with the city of Aiken County dropping you at various places around Aiken that have historical information. We have a program kicking off this summer called Passport, just like a little passport when you travel abroad, but it is a portal into the past here in Aiken County. And there are 14 places all around Aiken County where you can take your little passport, and you're free here at the museum when we get them printed. And you can find out about the history in that location, get it stamped, just like you were going to another country. Once you finish, you'll have some sort of bonus for the people who get all of those places stamped, and maybe you'll have a graduate course there. I think we have other lectures coming in the fall. You can tell we've been busy planning, and now we get to do it. So please come back, not just to this lecture series, but for all of our events coming in the future. It is really exciting to be part of this museum. I know you believe that because you're here. So thank you for coming, and come see the County History Club.